Alright, guys. Alrighty, hello everybody. Today I am grumpy Sidney Winston. It's just one of those days. Rainy, drab. I haven't put my daylighter on yet, but I will. But what I want to show us today, I haven't watched this interview, but it's Lionel Nation, one of the smartest analysts I know on the news circuit today. I guess on the alternative news circuit today. He conducts an interview that goes on for well over an hour with someone he calls Syrian girl. Now I haven't watched it. I've watched lots of Lionel being interviewed, and he never misses a beat. He's pretty sharp. He's pretty spot on. He's hilarious. And what I want to do is pretty much play the whole I guess interview. We have carte blanche to stop it at any time. If there's any comments in the YouTube chat, I'll address them. I'll keep an eye on them. I'll keep an eye on the YouTube chat while it's playing. All right. So you know what they say. Without further ado, blah 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 blah.
I am honored right now to have with me Syrian girl to go through one of the most complicated issues, which I think is sadly and unnecessarily complicated, and that is the plight and the goings-on of Syria and how our mainstream media, as usual, distort, obfuscate, and completely obscure the truth. Syrian girl, thank you for joining me.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
First of all, let's just get down to brass tacks. What is it that is the biggest misconception about either Syria or what's going on right now that makes you the most angry, if there is such a thing?
Well, in the past I would have said that there's the idea of the moderate rebels, but so far now that's really been overthrown. Most people know, well, at least half the United States, the half that voted for Trump, know that the Syrian rebels are actually linked to Al-Qaeda or the Muslim Brotherhood. So at the moment, that's not really the issue that is making me angry. The most crucial issue right now is the Balkanization of Syria, which I believe was the plan all along. It was written up in 2006 by Condoleezza Rice when they redrew the map of the Middle East, and also in 1982 by Israel in the Yinon Plan. And this is still the objective. With U.S. troops now in northeast Syria, that is the region that in these maps that were drawn up, that was the region that they wanted to balkanize.
Now, let me stop you right there. For those who are not as conversant, I understand with balkanization, fractionalizing. Explain balkanization for someone who is not conversant with that phrase.
Sure. Balkanization is from the Balkans in the 80s when Yugoslavia broke up into many different states on sectarian lines. The same thing, now that political term can be applied to other countries where you can say that these countries are being divided on sectarian lines or political lines. Basically, it just means a country being broken apart.
Now, many people, sadly, who believe mainstream, mainstream alt-left, anti-Trump, bought and sold corporate bumper sticker, echo chamber, cookie cutter media, believe the following: that Bashar al-Assad is an evil person, a bad man who kills his people, who is a tyrant, who is despotic, and That's it. That was presented to them as a fact. They don't know who he is, anything about him. They don't ever think about, well, whom would you want to replace him with exactly? Who will fill that vacuum? I don't know, but this is what's been presented to me. And he gasses his people. He uses barrel bombs, and they just, whatever you tell. They're doing the same thing now, by the way, North Korea. Same story. No questions asked. Do you know where this started from? When did Syria become the latest of the boogeymen? When?
Well, 2011, I suppose, if you were discussing, the layman people who listen to CNN. But when did Syria become a boogeyman? That would have been 60s, 50s, something like that. And it all began when Israel was created. And the US has this relationship with Israel that, they've been helping them since their inception. And of course, Israel occupies Syrian land and has been at war with Syria for multiple decades, basically since its inception.
But we in this country, we now have never understood the idea that Syria, all of a sudden, poses a threat to us somehow. We always knew there was this thing that most Americans call the Middle East. And the Middle East was this very confusing hodgepodge of strange people with sex and warlord. We didn't understand it. But all of a sudden, I remember when Hafez al-Assad was first portrayed to us as the bad guy, the baddest of the bad, in Homs and how he destroyed the city. And that's the first time I heard about it. Then we heard he was an Alawite. And nobody even knew what that was. But it sounded mysterious. And then later on, after he passed, then comes his son. And there was this idea that somehow there was this group of, and what I'm saying, I'm not trying to be comedic. This is actually our media version of history. All of a sudden in Syria, a bunch of brave rebels, much like our own revolutionaries, fought up against this tyrant. And we are assisting them, maybe not in arms theoretically, but we are in spirit, and because they're rebels much like we are, and they're fighting back for their own country and their own independence and
freedom
and freedom and democracy are messy, which is what Dick Cheney said. But anyway, but then came the gassing in Ghouta. Remember that? It was 2013 or 11, I don't know. And other people said that never happened. That never happened. It was staged. And then Americans again say, there you go again with this conspiracy theory again. These staged events. And I'm sitting back and I've been saying, stop, everybody, get a grip. That pretty much is a very minute capsulization of what happened. And there are many people and friends of mine who are supposedly learned. That's more than they know. And I don't. We are being asked to intervene in something. And by the way, and I'm speaking too much, and I apologize because it's very upsetting to me.
That's okay.
ISIS. If ever there were two people who were really against truly ISIS lately, it's Syria, Assad, and Russia. Actually targeting these people. And then we have the involvement, we'll get to this, of Turkey and Erdogan, completely ignored by American media. And there we have this hodgepodge. So, dive in.
Sure thing. Where to begin? Well, let's start where you finished off. Why would Syria and Russia be the most opposed to ISIS? Well, it's because ISIS poses the greatest existential threat to the state of Syria and Russia, because Russia has a very sizable Muslim minority in the millions, and especially around the Caucasus, and they're afraid of having upheaval there if ISIS gets in. ISIS may be a threat to the rest of the world, but they're a threat to the population, not to the state of the United States and European countries. And hence, the state will use these terrorist organizations to gain power in the geopolitical sphere, but they don't really care that there's going to be some, repercussions of that which will result in the deaths of their populations, because, it's not a threat to the state. ISIS is a creature that came out of the Iraq War, and it's actually been very, very useful in destabilizing Syria, in creating chaos, but most of all, and more recently, it has, if you noticed, been completely most in power in the northeast of Syria. Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, these are the places that the US military have been sent in and have been operating. And this also happens to be the exact location where the plans to Balkanize Syria were drawn. So it's almost as though ISIS provides the facility and the excuse to enter Syria and create this Balkanization idea. And while there's a lot of people that are still, the ones who would vote for Obama, the ones that say that Assad is a war criminal, but then go and vote for Obama, who is himself one of the biggest war criminals, they might still be stuck in 2013 in that discussion about, well, Assad's a bad man and chemical weapons and democracy and rebels and revolution and all that stuff. But now there's a new dialogue emerging. These people are no longer power players. They've been pushed out. Now the thing is, what is the United States doing in the northeast of Syria? And the problem that we have now is that while we had a discussion in the past where these Obama voters were pro-rebels, whereas people who opposed them and knew more about what was going on, they were opposed to the rebels and they were opposed to Al-Qaeda being given weapons in Syria. But now both of these groups are okay, sort of, with what the US is doing in Syria. The first group, the Obama voters, they're happy that the US is going in to fight ISIS, and also the other side thinks that's what's happening. And both sides are very sympathetic to the creation of a Kurdish state, and they have no idea about the history of it. So the main problem here is that as much as their ignorance exists about Syria, unfortunately, the ignorance about this issue, about the creation of a Kurdish state and the support of the U.S. military to the Kurds and the militia that they're fighting with now, there's very little discussion or information about that at all. Most people just support that and don't really understand what's happening. Finally, just on the chemical weapons, whether in Ghouta in 2013, the chemical weapons attack, it did happen, but it wasn't the Syrian government that did it, of course. The identity of the people that did it, some would say were the rebels, but personally, I feel that it's more likely to have been a third party, and I said that at the time. The issue of chemical weapons in Syria is one of the three agendas that the policymakers wanted to achieve in Syria. Number one was get rid of the Assad government. Number two was get rid of the chemical weapons. And number three was Balkanization. These are the three objectives. Of course, they achieved the removal of the chemical weapons. And we have ample evidence that shows that this was the objective all along, because they were trying to get rid of them since 2004. The US actually went to both Gaddafi and Assad right after the Iraq War, and they said that unless you give us your chemical weapons, we're going to invade just like we did in Iraq. And Gaddafi actually gave them up. And Assad actually said, well, if you're going to give up, if we're going to get rid of chemical weapons, why don't we get rid of chemical weapons throughout the entire Middle East? And he put a United Nations suggestion that the entire Middle East be getting rid of weapons of mass destruction, including Israel. And the US actually vetoed this proposal. And eventually, We have 2010 and 2011. Gaddafi is stabbed in the street by a crazed mob of Al-Qaeda fanatics. And Assad is still fighting on, and having since gotten rid of chemical weapons, that is no longer really part of the discussion.
Forgive me, but I have never understood how anybody in this day and age is even talking about chemical weapons. What? You don't use chemical weapons. Nobody. If ever you can think of something that is verboten in war, which makes no sense, nuclear weapons are more understandable than chemical weapons. Who uses them? Going back to very quickly the Ghouta story. As I'm reading this, and other people like Cy Hirsch and others were investigating this, they found that these people who were apparently the victims of this by Assad, their bodies were decomposing. They apparently were brought in, and it was there was all kinds of evidence that I read of this being not a false flag, but basically false evidence that was presented. This enrages people because they believe, I guess, perhaps that maybe, and you've heard the same thing too, correct? The fact that these images of death and destruction were staged, manufactured.
I've heard that, yeah.
Well, there's an innocence that I have a problem in trying to deal with. I'm saying you got to understand that the notion of the false flag has a very interesting conspiratorial sound to it, but it's the essence of warfare. It goes back to Sun Tzu about creating illusion and the like. But let me go back even more. Is it safe to say that were there no oil, were there no gas, were there no energy, if Syria was not critical in terms of energy, nobody would be talking about sex or we couldn't care less about Kurds. Isn't that the basis of why Syria is so critical? Energy.
There's a very good argument to make for that, and I think that theory does have a lot of evidence for it. We can see that one of the issues that started the war was that Syria didn't allow a gas pipeline to go through it because they had a different deal going with Russia and Iran of a different pipeline going through. Syria recently has discovered very large amounts of gas reserves. Personally, I think that this is not the only reason why Syria is being attacked. I think that it also has to do with the fact that Syria is a very independent country. It has its own central bank. It doesn't have any IMF debt. And the issue with Israel. And finally, you could say that the weapons industry thrives on chaos and thrives on war. And there is this broader objective of dividing the Middle East into various sects in order to get, Kurds over here, Sunnis over there, Shia over here, Christians over here, Druze over there, just to get them divided into sects so that they would be in perpetual war with each other. And then, the US wouldn't have to invent reasons to invade people because...
Right. It was funny you say that. If you and I ran the world, just imagine that for a second, and we were unscrupulous and horrible and we cared nothing about it, the first thing we would want destabilization, fractionalized confusion and chaos. Stability is our worst enemy. The reason why we always talk about antioxidant foods and antioxidants is it stops free radicals. There's an interesting analogy there. We don't like unstable molecules, and but we do like unstable regions. If we are war profiteers, warmongers, we are part of a military-industrial complex, we thrive when there's fractionalized states, rump states. Okay, that's one thing. But somebody one time said, the great Gerald Salenti said, what would be the likelihood of our invading Iraq if their main export had been broccoli? The answer is none. But you mentioned something which is more interesting to talk about this because, as you know, many people in the United States view this collective thing called the Middle East as backwards, some prehistoric, Arab, unsophisticated area. Syria was against, you said, IMF debt, central banks, against GMOs. Right there, saying no to Monsanto. Look what happened to Iraq when Bremer guaranteed, mandated, that all of a sudden in Iraq, look what happens to GMOs in India and the suicides and all of this. Syria basically is thumbing its nose at not only big agri, big pharma, the military-industrial complex. It's a model of stability, and we can't have that.
No, exactly. And if it's not just about Monsanto making money. And it's not just about the fact that GMOs can potentially cause health problems because we haven't really done the research, or they could cause environmental problems. It's also because what's happening in India is that the farmers are committing suicide because if their crop fails, they cannot afford to buy the seeds from Monsanto the next year. And Monsanto basically has a trademark on their seeds, whereas previously farmers would save their seeds from the previous year to put in the next crop. Monsanto has its own trademark on its genetically modified seed. In that sense, Monsanto can control whether your entire country will eat or not, because they can say, oh, well, I'm going to increase the price of my seed, and lots of, farmers are not going to be able to afford that, and a lot of people are going to starve. And as you said, Bremer wrote that into Iraq's law. And, Syria has opposed this because it is another way to control people. It's another way to bring people to their knees, just as is debt. And in fact, if you look closely at what people are writing in the news now, especially Robert Ford, the ex-ambassador to both Iraq, Libya, and Syria, he said that, to Syria, in order to rebuild, they're going to need to get some loans from the IMF. So the dream is still to push for that, for that thing to happen, which they did in Libya.
Well, look what happened in Egypt with Morsi. And all of a sudden, when he had IMF loans immediately, when Egypt went through its tumult, but let me go back, even back. Who is ISIS? And before we do this, I have a theory, a hypothesis, that as soon as we in the West become familiar with a particular term, they change it. Even names, Peking, Beijing, Mao Zedong. Gaddafi spelled 75,000 ways with K, just always changed. So we went from Al-Qaeda, AQI, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, IS, ISIL, ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Nusra. It's this permutation.
ISI.
Okay, there you go. Daesh, which was apparently used because it was a pejorative because they did not like the word Islamist or whatever. So anyway, we have American news programs with maybe a minute, maybe if they're lucky they'll do a minute, and they cannot go through the various permutations of all of this. So right now, explain to me, who is this thing called ISIS? Who are they? Who runs them? What do they want? Where's their headquarters? Who runs them? How do we stop them? If I were right now to appoint you as the czarina, so to speak, of this fight against terror, how would you stop them?
It's very simple. Just with basically, you stop Saudi Arabia, you stop the UAE, you stop Qatar, and you stop Turkey, and perhaps you also stop Israel from supporting these people, and it'll end because they'll be suffocated.
Why would anybody want to? I'm asking this theoretically. Why would somebody want to fund evil terrorist people who behead children, who attack Christians, who are, assuming all of this to be true, what would be the motivation of these sovereign nations funding, fueling, fomenting, encouraging, and supporting these horrible groups of people? What do they want out of this?
Well, three things. Number one, they want to push Russia out of the sphere of influence in the Middle East.
Why? Why? Let's start with that. What's with Russia?
Go for it. Well, it's since the Cold War. Where did Al Qaeda get born, Afghanistan, as a result of the US helping the Taliban, and Osama bin Laden was interviewed by Robert Fisk and was seen as the hero who got rid of the Soviet Union. The fact is that a lot of these governments that are being overthrown are all secular. You don't see any of the very extreme Islamist nations being overthrown. It's only the secular ones that are getting overthrown. And this, a lot of those governments were very close with Russia in relations. That's why push them out? Well, at the end of the day, it's about power. It's just about power, nothing more. The other thing is they drew a map. They've drawn a map and they want to go for that map because divide and conquer. And ISIS really helps in the creation of that map because even when it began as Al-Qaeda, it sows the seeds of sectarianism. You know, Iraq, before the Iraq War happened, it wasn't all peachy, but the sectarian divide wasn't nearly as strong as it is now.
Right.
But at the beginning, like in 2004, a lot of Iraqis came together to oppose the occupation. But in sowing the seed of divide and conquer, they were able to more easily control people and create this, this sort of domino effect so that the sectarianism can move on to Syria because it's very close, and a lot of those people that were Al-Qaeda in Iraq moved over and created ISIS in Syria.
But
so,
no, I'm sorry, but the question I have is, okay, we know who funds them. Who are these people individually? Are these poor,
sure,
young men? How, for example, if we wanted to go out and recruit ISIS, where do we go and what do we offer them?
Great question. They're coming from around the world. So each place that they're coming from has a different agenda and objective. If you look at the ones that are coming from the UK, a lot of them are of Pakistani backgrounds who have been actually born in the United Kingdom and have had a long history there, and they may have felt like they were living in the fringe of society and they didn't have a lot of power, and now they get to go to a faraway land and become kings of their own dominion. Then you have, people from, let's say, Saudi Arabia who have been indoctrinated their entire lives by these mosques about how, the Shiites and the Alawites are evil and the Christians are evil and we got to go and put, like this Wahhabist
right.
Sharia law, and this is the Wahhabi cult. And this Wahhabi cult, it's like any religion, Christianity, Judaism, Islam has a lot of different sects. And Wahhabism is a very extreme one that takes everything very literally and relies heavily on the hadiths rather than the Quran. The hadith is a separate book to the Quran, which basically is like hearsay stories. And there's many different ones, and some of them are contradictory. And also they have this messianic prophecy that if they were to take over Damascus, this would expedite the end of the world, because when Jesus returns, it's written that he returns in Damascus. And hence, in order for Jesus to return, Damascus has to be ruled by the proper Islamic government.
Stop right there, just for a second. We have, lest someone thinks, oh God, these people are... Because, there's an anti-Muslim, as you can imagine, in especially right now with what people perceive President Trump as advocating. They're saying, Islam is not a religion of peace. And I'm thinking, with 1.5 roughly billion Muslims in the world, if just 10% were these radicalized maniacs, that's 150 million. We would be seeing forest fires and trains. We would be seeing so much more. So the math doesn't work out. But let me just go back to what you said. There are Christians who believe in this eschatology, the end of times. And that's why they believe that the Middle East and Israel and Syria, that bring about a nuclear war, bring about the end. It doesn't matter. It's biblical prophecy. It's coming.
Sure.
And their connection has nothing to do with any brotherhood with any particular group. It's to, as you say, expedite or to hasten the end of the world, which will reunite us with God. So that ain't just a Muslim thing. It's
No,
here as
it's also a Jewish thing. So a lot of these people who were Zionists in Europe before the creation of Israel, one of their reasons for creating Israel is because it's written that near the end of the world, the Messiah will come when Israel is created, and 6 million Jews are dead. There's lots of little signs that have to happen. And of course, the end of the world is supposed to happen in Mount Megiddon or Armageddon, and that is on the border of Syria and Israel.
Now, just imagine the end of time, these three converging themes happening concomitantly. And I always thought to myself, isn't it amazing how this one little part of real estate involves so much end of times and all right. Let me stop just for 1 second, because this is critical. Because a lot of times and I appreciate you being here, and especially the fact that you've taken time out of your day, fighting febrility and illness to endure my stupid questions. But the stupid questions are the good questions. Now, the thing that's important right now is here is what I don't understand, and I'm sure you know this as well. All of a sudden, we became very, very Russo-phobic. We went from red baiting in the 50s now to Kremlin baiting. And I saw something which is very interesting. I saw the news as follows. Assad says, I'm going to team with Putin. Here is, if you look at the Jarablus corridor, this is where ISIS is. Here we have our gunships. There's a highway, the M4, whatever it is. The white trucks from Toyota, here they come. Get them. And we're going to show these people that they're going to go back to wherever they are. And we'll get to Turkey in a moment. They're going to say, by the way, here's the keys to the Toyota. Here's my flag. I'm getting the hell out of here. I don't know. I had dreams of glory, but this is not for me. Meaning you want to demoralize, crush, vanquish. As this was occurring, as everyday Russian news and press and Syrian were showing these convoys and being just decimated, Kerry and others were talking about ceasefire. We got to stop this. Stop this? What are you talking about? Now, explain who Erdogan, or Erdogan as it's spelled, how Erdogan, Turkey, how do they fit into this? And why are they left out of the calculus of explanation in terms of Western review of this?
Actually, more and more, they have been used as a scapegoat for what is essentially U.S. foreign policy. They've been labeled Erdogan. He's the one that's been supporting Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and we haven't done anything. It's all been Erdogan. And it's all of it. There's been this rhetoric, and it seems as though this is because Turkey is opposed to the creation of a Kurdish separatist state, which has been the Balkanization objective. So the U.S. and Turkey are in disagreement on this. Where Turkey fits into it is in 2010, 2009, Syria and Turkish relations had a period where they were better than ever, and things were looking up, and Syria actually made a very ridiculously stupid policy, in my view, and in hindsight, of having an open border with Turkey so that trade can happen more easily. And eventually Turkey used this open border to allow insurgents in and out and weapons and ammunition to pass through. Why Turkey is doing this? Number one, they're part of NATO, so whatever the U.S. foreign policy is, they're gonna, copy. And there was something in it for them. This pipeline that was supposed to run from Qatar through Iraq, Jordan, and into Syria, and then Turkey onto Europe, was supposed to supply Europe with the oil resources, and hence make Turkey sort of a gateway to Europe and in so much control over whether or not Europe gets energy. So then when Assad refused that, they could turn off the tap whenever they wanted. When Assad said, well, I can't do that because it's going to undercut my ally, they thought to themselves, well, we'll just remove him and it'll be quick. And if you remember at the time, they were all talking about, Syria's about to fall, they're on the edge and it's going to happen. And I'm sure they were sold the idea that it was going to be very easy, that, Assad's running a minority government that nobody likes and it's going to be toppled super easy because the majority of Syrians are Sunni Muslims and blah, blah, blah. And they bought into that and they invested a lot into it, especially Erdogan. His rhetoric against Syria became very bad very quickly. And of course, Erdogan himself, his party, is linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, unlike ISIS, but, their idea is to have a democratic system of like Christian Democrats, except Muslim Democrat. It's still Sharia, but it's like a democratic Sharia where you could vote for people. And Turkey, of course, under this party, this is what Erdogan is. And he has links to the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria. And that's why he's thinking, we'll put my guys in power.
Do you know?
It didn't end up like that.
Do you know what a lot of folks, and I don't mean, because a lot of my American and Western and world friends are very, very hip. But do you know how many people heard what you just said and are thinking, what the hell is she talking about? Turkey, NATO, Muslim Brotherhood, I can't even figure out who the Alawites. You see, I have to stop right there. We love a Manichaean good and evil. Good guy, bad guy. Left, right, up, down, black, white, no grays, no middle. Just tell me we have to understand this is evil. And I firmly believe that there is not anyone from even the most evil sect or organization who considers himself evil. Never. Nobody says, you know what, I'm an evil guy. And I could either be a serial killer, but instead I'm going to join this organization because I'm basically evil. I have no political affiliation. I'm just evil. I love to behead and burn and no. Because
what about Clinton?
Pardon me?
What about Hillary Clinton?
Okay, now stop for a second to bring this right there. Now, stop right there. This is, as you can imagine, I have lost more friends. Well, they're not really friends, but I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I voted for me. I swear to God, I wrote my name in. And I thought, first of all, Hillary Clinton's going to beat Trump. There's no way you're going to beat the Clintons. He's got Soros and, nice try, Donald. Lo and behold, he wins. More people are saying, you've said it. Not so much pro-Trump, but you mentioned anti-Hillary. It's almost as though Trump is indeed not only the lesser of two evil, but he actually extended what appeared to be an olive branch of some sort to Russia. He may very well, provided he's not overrun by his neocon military faction, which I think are now rearing their head. But Trump provided a more optimistic view for perhaps world peace, if there is such a thing, as anybody else. Does that sound about right to you?
Yes, and as you said, I was never pro-Trump. I was always anti-Hillary. And the reason I said, this is a better alternative, of course, if you would have suggested instead of Trump, but it seemed like that there might be a potential for change, whereas with Clinton, the door was closed on that. That doorway for change, however, is they're trying to shut it as much as possible. And the problem is that he has such a cult of personality and his supporters are so vehement that they may not even be able to realize that the door is shutting.
Right.
So that's the danger of Trump. But also, it's like we had a bad luck with Hillary and we're rolling the dice with Trump, and it could be better. It couldn't be worse. So
right. Well, it's almost like you're a physician and you have to prescribe something and you're saying, this is arsenic, this is cyanide. I don't know what this is, but I've got to give you something. So I'm going to go with this one because I know it may kill you, but I don't know if it will. But these two I know will destroy you. You know, one of the things I want to just step back for a moment. This is the problem that I ask friends here to understand. We have the United States. I love my country and my fellow Americans and us. And I'm sure you love the Syrians. Now, there are people who don't necessarily represent us. NATO. If you ask most people, who are NATO? NATO is a good group of people. They defend us. NATO is basically responsible for stirring up all of the problems regarding Russia and Ukraine and Crimea, and nobody here understands that. We also have groups of people. We have this military-industrial complex. We have the intelligence committee. We now are talking about the deep state. I'm not sure if you've seen this, but all of a sudden, overnight, people from Newt Gingrich to Charles Krauthammer, Dennis Kucinich, Chuck Schumer, people who have nothing to do with each other, are now talking about deep state, conspiracy, parallel governments, governments within a government. In fact, Syria, and I'm reading and listening to what you've said before in the past, Syria embraces the notion that, oh yes, there are secret factions and there are secret organizations, but these people don't represent mainstream America. Mainstream America has to ask, what threat does it pose to me? Or my way of life, or my freedom, or my oil? Fine, if it's, okay, fine, I understand it. And the answer is, oftentimes, nothing. It's manufactured, and you have a complicit media who not only perpetuates this myth, but acts as a repeater and not a reporter. They're almost passing it on. Give me the information, the propaganda, and I will repackage it and portray it. I mean, this is the way I see it, and it's frightening.
Yes, exactly. Well, the U.S. is now one of the biggest producers of oil. I'm not sure if it's exporter as well, but that quite possibly one of the biggest in the world, if not the biggest, and just surpassed Russia in that. So I don't think they desperately need as much oil as it's made out to be. But perhaps it's more about control of the oil.
No, but it's not
where it flows.
Nobody's ever thought. I mean, I never thought for a moment it's because about our oil. That's not it. It's oil means power. Who has oil?
Yes,
Petrodollar versus.
Exactly.
Listen, look what they did. Let me just go back to another thing. Going back to Gaddafi. Gaddafi was a fellow who I never understood. All of a sudden, we hated him. We kind of laughed at him. He started to wear the Sergeant Pepper outfits. He was linked to Lockerbie, which I never believed ever. That story is so far-fetched, it's not even funny. And lo and behold, he says, I think I'm gonna do a couple of things. And there's one thing they never talk about. Libya sits atop the Nubian sandstone aquifer, right there in the middle of Africa. This big, and it's water. And Gaddafi says, I'm going to make Libya arable. I'm going to pump $25 billion into this, and that water is mine. Hydro-imperialism, hydrology, war is the new currency water is the new currency of war. When you look at Iraq, where that was the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Fertile Crescent, the Garden of Eden, water, in addition to everything else, rare earth metals, and Afghanistan happens to be the Saudi Arabia of lithium. Isn't that amazing? Who would have thought that this epicenter of terrorism, the architects of 9/11, happened to be sitting on the greatest vault or vein of lithium which we need for computers and the like. Water, have you seen this as well? Water is like the secret little part of this in addition to oil and gas and natural reserves.
I didn't even know that about Libya, but I do know about the water thing in Syria, because Syria was a lot more arable, but has had 8 years of drought that has caused it to become very arid, because Turkey dammed the river that flows from Turkey into Syria, which almost caused a massive war between Syria and Turkey in the 80s. And this was one of the reasons that you had a lot of farmers lose their crops in Syria and move into the urban areas and live in virtual squalor, and created a lot of tension. And these people were not very well educated. They come in from the peasant villages, and they especially in Aleppo, because Aleppo is a very industrial area, they had a lot of envy for the people of Aleppo, the city of Aleppo, which during the revolution that they like to call the revolution, they're completely opposed to these Islamists and these rebels, and so they robbed them blind. They basically destroyed and looted all their factories, took their homes, their cars, their fridges and homes. They looted everything and they sold it, and they believed they were entitled to this because their farms didn't work out. So if and also these people are not good Muslims, and so we can take their car. But yes, I didn't know that about Libya, about there being this water element of that too. I was aware that there was a Gaddafi was talking about creating an African currency and an African union like the European Union, and that would have been very bad for the people who were trying to loot all of Africa's resources, because Libya was the richest country in Africa and was leading.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt because it's
please.
Skype, but one of the things that I always tell people is that there's one thing you will very rarely see on any American mainstream media is a map. You will never see, until you understand, whether it's Google Maps, a globe, if you don't understand, for example, Iran, Iraq, Syria, where things, how borders work. Unless you see this, when Libya came along and there were these gerrymandered Cyrenaica, Tripolitania, Fezzan, put together, and this hodgepodge, they loved Gaddafi. The black Libyans, Fezzan, loved him. Cyrenaica, that's Al Qaeda. Derna, Tobruk, Benghazi. I mean, I remember one time I was doing a TV commentary, and I said, "This is Benghazi," before anybody heard of Benghazi. I said, "This is the courthouse. This is the Al Qaeda flag. The rebels are Al Qaeda. We're supporting the rebels. Soylent Green are people." I'm saying the rebel, and you can hear the crickets. They say, "What is this guy talking about? What are you?" Beyond too much for us to understand. So now we've thrown into so far oil, gas, water. Throw in all this X. We have confused everybody, which I want to do. Let me ask you this $1 million question: who are the refugees? Why are they trying to leave? What are we supposed to understand about these poor people fleeing Syria? Or who are they, and where are they going to, and why are they leaving?
Well, it's actually a very complicated thing.
I can't believe that. I can't believe it's complicated.
Well, the people flowing into Europe, in fact, only 20% of them are from Syria. And so that means that the vast majority of the refugee crisis isn't caused by Syria. It's been going for a while. So, and not all of the people going into Europe are refugees. The refugees are the ones that apply to the United Nations for asylum. These are the people that come from countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, countries that have recently suffered wars, and maybe Somalia and Sudan. Sudan, they recently had their civil war. So these are the people that would count the boxes as refugees. But there's also a lot of economic immigrants coming from sub-Saharan Africa, Central Africa, that probably because of the economic imperialism that's being pushed on them. For example, many African countries still have to pay a colonial tax to France, even though, it's 2017. That they basically, their economies are being raped, and we're getting the poorest of Africa, the people who are ready to basically cross the Sahara and risk dehydrating to death than go on a boat to get to Europe so that they can potentially make money, and then they get stuck there because they can't afford to go back and they can't cross the Sahara again. So there's that element of it. And then you have the wars that are creating refugees. And, people often say, well, most of these people are men. And there's many reasons for that. Number one, as you could see by the amount of people that drown on the way, it's a very dangerous journey, and not many people are willing to put their kids on a boat that could possibly sink. So they'll say, oh, well, I'll go and I'll set it up, and then I'll call for you. And a lot of people have gotten there, and they told the United Nations, actually, my family's back home. And Germany had a policy at the beginning of saying that you can call for your family to also be brought to you once you arrive. But then they've actually realized that times is the people that arrive by 4 and they can't handle it. So they've changed that policy. And a lot of the people that arrived there under this pretext are like, oh, well, now I want to go back. And they're like, no, you can't go back. And they're like, you have to afford it, and you don't have any money. So it's a very complicated
Well, let me
story.
stop right there. Oh, I'm sorry. Please continue.
Sorry, one last thing.
Yes, yes,
also, the element of the European Union wanting to have more lax immigration law, and they want to have cheap overseas labor. And this entire catastrophe provides them the sympathetic line that they can use for that. That's
Okay.
it.
Okay. First, you just boggled what's left of the mind of anybody who thought they could even understand this. The way it's being portrayed right now is as follows. Remember, 1 minute news feed. Flooding, rapists, criminals, beheading, Trump, wall, Mexico, immigration, Calais, France, horror, Merkel, crazy, and that's it. So people are saying no to immigration. That's the way they view this huge mosaic. That's number one. But you said something which nobody understands. You mentioned something called the EU. Let's talk about this thing called the New World Order. And this is the idea that people still consider as some kind of a conspiracy theory, yet it's been uttered by virtually every president since whatever. If you and I are in the New World Order, we want a one world government, a unipolar world. We want to destroy democracy, jurisdiction, currency, differences, states. We want one world. Come on in, move in. That's why George W. Bush never cared about immigration, never cared about that, never cared about it, because he's a part of that. We don't want there to be law and order, because remember, we are either a globalist or whatever you want to call us. We love disorder. We love fractionalized destabilization. But we also want to just say free labor and the like. So in our country right now, we're debating this, whether Trump's a madman, is he a xenophobe, is he an Islamophobe, because he wants to build a wall, which whether he can build it or not, I don't know. Because that's all people know. We don't want to be like you. And you is the world. This 1 30-second B-roll horror film of catastrophe, beheading, rape, and destruction and the like. That's what people think. And so they're not, because of this, people here are saying no more immigration, no more, we don't want to be like France. And somehow Assad's behind this because they're Syrian. And I've just described for you the entire American mainstream media perspective. That's simple.
That's very unfortunate. So basically, I really believe that there was an agenda that any single thing that any immigrant or refugee or someone who is of historically European descent, that has a second generation immigrant, they did anything in Europe, what they would say is Syrian refugees were behind it.
Correct.
Like
absolutely.
The terrorism that happened in Paris, there was a Syrian passport that was left behind. It turned out to be fake.
Correct.
And the Cologne rapes, the headline said Syrian. It turned out to be I don't remember what it was, but it was sub-Saharan Africa mainly. And of course there was this, part of the refugee thing in Syria is to create this propaganda against Syria. It's weaponized the refugee crisis. They've made it about Syria is causing all of these problems in Europe, and hence we must attack Syria, or the Assad is creating all these refugees, and hence we must attack Syria. That's the two, you've got the left and the right, they reach the same conclusion. It's what we have to attack Syria. And everything you said is the bigger picture, this globalization thing. These companies that want to have, less tax and restrictions, the nation state is completely against them. And it would be far more easy if there were no borders. And to do that, you have to make people forget anything to do with culture, with history, with language. And Syria is it's not just Europe and the United States and all these Western countries are under attack. The Middle East as well. I mean, Syria has a very, very long history, a very distinct ethnicity and society. And basically, at the moment, we're being attacked from all sides, from people around the world who want to live on our land and claim it to be their own. Except the difference, I hear a lot of these right-wing people say, well, a lot of these refugees are invading us. But they're not carrying guns. They're not killing you and taking your house like ISIS is doing in Syria.
Oh, stop that. Or what if, I ask people all the time, what would you think about a military base in New Jersey that's not American? The French military base, we'd say, what? Now, let me do this. You've been so kind. I want to wrap this up because I know you've been, for somebody who was laboring under febrility, you would never know. So I thank you for this. But I have to finish off with this one. I was watching the Academy Awards in horror for a variety of reasons. And one of the things was when they were lauding and heralding the white helmets. The white helmets, these brave. And I screamed, and I'm sure in my neighborhood people heard me say, what? And there you have Meryl Streep, Academy, the Hollywood intelligentsia, the cognoscenti, yes. And I'm saying, do you have any idea? That's part one of my question, because I love complicated questions that you cannot possibly answer because they're so involved. Labyrinth in a question. Number two, John McCain visiting, sitting with, lunching with, everything from cannibals to how is he going to Syria? How is he getting, how has this man sifted through this sieve of a I guess what you would think would be a lucid media who would say, wait a minute, do you know who you're with? Okay, so two questions. White helmets, John McCain, you have the floor.
Well, for those that really know the truth about the white helmets, and as you were like appalled by the Oscars, I think for you guys, don't be so annoyed, because what's happened now is going to be beneficial to us, because they have doubled down on giving Al-Qaeda an Oscar. And that's something we can use against them for decades to come. The white helmets, if you go on my channel, Syrian Girl War, I have a video of them actually torturing Syrian soldiers. These guys are one photo of them in white helmet uniform. The next photo is them torturing Syrian soldiers.
You're saying that the Academy Awards gave Al-Qaeda an Oscar?
Yes. There's ample footage of them helping with executions, flying Al-Qaeda flags, carrying guns openly, making fake videos. But they doubled down on it, so this is great.
Okay, who are the white helmets for those at home? Who are they?
The white helmets are basically an MI5 operation, or MI6, that they gave millions and millions of dollars to set up this so-called NGO that's operating in all of the Al-Qaeda held areas in Syria, and it's supposed to be neutral, but all of its members also happen to be, Al-Qaeda militants during their day job, and white helmets on camera for the West, pulling up bodies and saving people supposedly. But a lot of these videos they've come up with have been proven to be fake.
By the way, just for a second, you have done some wonderful pieces. I know you and my friend Paul Joseph Watson and others have talked about this. And there are actually screens. They have movie sets, and I'm thinking, this can't be. And you must go through this as well. This is certainly this has got to be the final, straw. Finally, we have something that shows this is all contrived and manufactured, and also because of portable phones and cell phones and cameras, citizen journalists now capture them in the act. I've seen white helmet folks doing selfies. The poor little boy who was beheaded, and how one fake child can be elevated, and another one. I'm sorry. I'm waxing gibberish.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, does anybody investigate? It's so easy. I can just go online and just check. Does anybody even care about the lies they're perpetrating?
They just don't know any better. I mean, every single media, that mainstream media, and their front lines was this little boy in an ambulance. He was dusty in Syria. His head was still attached to his body. He was, in an ambulance, and he was dusty. But on the other hand, you have this other boy who was deliberately beheaded by a moderate rebel group with links to the white helmets. This rebel group, Nur al-Zinki, was one of the groups that the CIA said were moderate. They vetted them and they gave them weapons, training, and guns. They were the ones, not Al-Qaeda or ISIS, that beheaded the child. And you hear nothing about it. And in fact, his face is not seen. It was obscured. It was pixelated. They will show you the face of the boy in the ambulance who has dust on him, but they will not show you the face that was decapitated by Obama's and the deep state's foreign policy.
We give you an idea of one thing, and I don't know if people in our mainstream media. Truly, a lot of them are, I don't want to say because they're young, because being young is fine, but they don't really have their worldview is very limited. Maybe they've got a job, maybe they're somehow applauded for their work, but I don't think they deliberately put out this information. But let me give you an example. Mosul, Aleppo. Mosul. Surgical American forces. And when I love our American I have nothing against our troops and nothing about that. This is a fact. The way it's portrayed, Mosul, Iraq, surgical, precision, precise, gun turret shots of derricks and oil, precision, surgical, clean, victory, yay. Okay, that's us, that's Mosul, that's Iraq. Now, Aleppo, Russia. Leveled neighborhoods, rubble, destruction, people fleeing, screaming, fire, chaos, collateral damage, just a mess. Nothing going right. The fog of war. Surgical precision, complete chaos.
Yeah.
Coincidence?
No. In fact, something very humorous happened. There's this journalist, I forget her name exactly, but she's always she's based in Iraq, and she's always talking about how great, the US precision strikes are and how bad Assad is. But then there was an attack inside Syria against ISIS, I believe, and there was rumors that it was the United States. So she started saying, this had to have been the United States because it was such an excellent precision strike. And then it turned out that it was not the United States. They denied it. And in fact, it was the Syrian Air Force that was behind it. And there you go. She was completely embarrassed and,
Well, there's no correction.
exposed.
But there's no correction. But by the way, remember, Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, learned, I believe he was in the Air Force, learned how to pilot in Russia and always had this. There was a connection for you. People they act like all of a sudden there's this Russian connection. Let me just tell you something. It is so frightening to me how a meme, a trope, an idea, a thought, a convention can be created so quickly and absorbed so fast by people here without any filter, any discriminating eye, any question whatsoever. I know people who are just, and I'm my generation. I remember the Vietnam War, and we just were told this story, and people just accepted. And I thought, well, thank God, Vietnam's over. We've learned from that. That's not going to happen again because we're more discriminating, and we understand the role of the press and how they can be propagandists. Fine, wrong. Then I thought, well, there are not going to be any more stupid wars. Wrong. There won't be any more political assassinations. Wrong. People after JFK will understand that there is a deep part of the government, and they'll be more skeptical. Wrong. We have become, in a strange way, more accepting, more gullible. And with this, I thought, this phone, this internet, this is our salvation. I can pick this up and I can go to any newspaper in any town, in any city, in any state, in any country and learn the truth. The people won't be fooled anymore. It's worse now. It's this paradox. I don't understand it. There are many people like you and others who are saying, no, here's what's happening. And that's missed altogether. What has happened to us not as a country, but as a species, humans? Are we becoming more stupid? Something's happened to us.
Honestly, I used to think exactly like you. After the Iraq War, I thought, no, it's not going to be as easy to convince people. After the Iraq War, things are going to change. But then you had Libya, and everyone was convinced by it until they got to Syria, and then people were a little bit more reluctant. But that was because, really, I used to get quite upset. I used to think that the only way there's going to be any change is if a lot of people wake up. Now I'm coming to the realization that possibly the majority of people will never wake up. The majority of people in every country, including maybe Syria, they don't really care about politics. They just want to live. They want to have fun. They want to go out with their friends. They want to go to uni. They want to get married. They want to have kids. They don't really care. And many of them don't watch the news. The ones that do watch the news are misinformed, or they agree with whatever the zeitgeist is. Mm-hmm. The important thing is the people that affect change, the people that do care, that are interested. If you can reach those minds, then you can affect change.
Yes.
If you look at Coney 2012, that was a very good experiment. They went viral. There was billions of people talking about it. And then they had a movement they had, so many people pressing like on their Facebook page, and they were going to have a protest. And they were supposed to make all of these people who have never been active about anything before active. But then you had these opposing voices, which didn't even nearly have as much impact as the Coney 2012 video. And yet, educate who they saw and basically turn them around in a sense. The people were not educated. The people who would have saw the Coney 2012 video, who would have clicked like, who aren't political, who aren't active, they're not going to be active from watching a video, and they didn't. The protests, in spite of these billions of views, the protests, there was no turnout. Nobody came because the people that they convinced are just not active. And so I'm beginning to realize it's quality over quantity.
There's also something in conclusion, and again, I thank you for this, but there's something else that's happened here. it's sometimes people found out years ago that, somebody somewhere, the first human, ate a plant, ate something that had fermented, got drunk, and said, hey, certain things make us drunk. Maybe we can go back and try to recreate that. Certain information, certain platforms make us drunk, turn us off, turn us on, make us aware of not. This creates the illusion of participation and collectivity, but it also encourages people to be more and more alone, detached, and not participatory. Before social media, people had to go out and protest. Before social media, the only way, like the 60s, I don't think the war in Vietnam would probably still be going on had there been, social media. So that's another issue too. But the bottom line is simply this. Because of people like you, because of folks who are just relentless, indefatigable, which is what you're doing, you have more of an impact than anybody will ever realize. And you can never lose sight of that. I don't think you have. Nobody's going. You're not going to win. They're not going to give you an award. You're not going to get any award, and that's not what I think anybody wants.
I don't want an award.
Nobody's going to give you an award.
Give me an Oscar.
Well, but the thing is that maybe I love the greatest thing for me is when somebody says, "I never knew that." I love that. I love those words. I never knew that. What's even better is, I used to think this. Tolstoy said, history would be a wonderful thing if only it were true. And sometimes reality would be a wonderful thing if only it were true. I want to thank you for this. In conclusion, and again, you would have never known this. You weathered through this, and I thank you. What are your, I don't want to say final thoughts. That sounds dire, but your valedictory, your closing statements.
My closing statements is, for those who have an inquisitive mind, who really, want to just not be content with the fact that perhaps the new U.S. foreign policy will be not to support these Al-Qaeda rebels, I would recommend they really consider what the U.S. troops are doing now in Manbij and in Raqqa, and whether or not it's okay to divide Syria on sectarian or ethnic lines, like by creating a Kurdish state, even though 40% of that region and not a majority are Kurdish, and even though most of the water and oil is in that region, which will result in the 22 million Syrians starving and being poor, and which will create more refugees. Mm-hmm. I would like your viewers not to just question the policy that Obama has, which is to, fund these Al-Qaeda rebels, but also the policy that's happening in the so-called fight on ISIS and the real agenda behind that.
Absolutely. Well, Syrian Girl, I will have all of your links in this particular video. I want to thank you so much. It has been not only a pleasure, but an honor to speak with you. And I thank you for all of your tireless work, your hours upon hours of videos and just tremendous journalism and spirit. And I thank you immensely.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's really been a pleasure and a great discussion.
I hope we do it again. Thank you so much.
Me too. Thank you. Bye.
Well, there you have it. Personally, I think she's a lot more knowledgeable about the history of Syria and the region than she is about anything to do with Israel, because she did mention Israel a few times and I didn't really understand, because she just kind of rushed over it and I really didn't understand the basis for her, and it sound acrimonious. It definitely sounded malevolent. It was not a positive statement. Neither of them were positive statements. Yeah. So I did say I was going to check the YouTube chat for some evidence of intelligent conversation. So let me just bring that in quickly. There it is. That's the YouTube chat. And Dilly NL, he writes, fucking kike. Well, be honest with you, I don't know if that's kind of intelligent, or if that's acrimonious, or if that's loathsome, knee-jerk reaction from a bigot. I don't know. But anyway, it seems like there is nothing more to discuss. So if there's anything else you do want to say right now before we switch this all off, go ahead, because we've got a few seconds before I sort of set up the outro here. The outro. Yeah, no, go ahead anytime. I'll keep my eye out on the YouTube outside chat as usual. Thank you for watching, by the way. If you like it. If you would like to subscribe, if you haven't yet, please do. And thank you for watching. And thank you for watching.